Hey, welcome to Tangible Takeaways, episode 139. I'm Jackson, and today I'm going to talk about why it's so important that you let God love you.
And I'm Kurt, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our life as we're examples to others. We're like a Costco sample that people see a bit of Christ, and we'll talk more about that.
All that and more on this episode of Tangible Takeaways. Hey, welcome to Tangible Takeaways, episode 139. Thanks for being on, Pastor Kurt.
It's great being here.
Yeah, glad that you're here. You were marching through Zephaniah this weekend, so the fun names continue, and then on top of that, the fun themes continue.
Yeah,
That's what we should have titled this series, Fun Names and Fun Themes.
Yeah, a study in what is not really accurate.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, it's not that fun. It's not that
Not
great.
that fun.
But it's so meaningful.
Yes, yeah, and I was familiar with the really beautiful image in Zephaniah at the end of chapter 3 of God singing over his people, because I think that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that stands alone, right? That's like the lone instance of God singing over his people. So just this beautiful singing and dancing. So it's like just this really beautiful picture of, you know, the way that the Trinity has been described in so many ways. It captures some of that beauty, this like love that sits at the universe, you know, this like deep joy. We think of God in such serious senses, and the minor prophets really help us think of God in such serious senses. And so I think that, you know, moment in Zephaniah stands out in such a unique way because it reminds us of this really carefree, joy-filled, abounding in love God for his people that we see so much of so many other places in Scripture. If you're looking for that in the minor prophets, it's harder to see
Hard
it there.
to find, yeah.
But it was cool getting to see different elements of the book because that was all I was familiar with coming into it. And what I thought was really interesting was all of the elements of reversal to start the book. You had the reversal of creation, and then you and I were talking after your message. You also have the reversal of those like 3 images that are used for the day of the Lord. It's like what? It's like a battle,
sacrifice,
a sacrifice,
and then that whole issue of disastrous destruction.
Yeah, which is kind of the opposite of how God should be relating to his people. He should be fighting for them, not fighting against them. He should be, they should be offering sacrifices to him, not him offering them as a sacrifice. And he should be destroying others on their behalf, not them, being destroyed by him. So it's this reversal of cosmic proportions, reversal as it relates to the day of the Lord, reversal as it relates to even creation. And all of that is tied to this kind of idea of God's judgment. So why do you think there was that? I was interested by that link between reversal and then judgment. What would you make of that?
Yeah, it's so hard because there's probably lots of layers. The thing that came to my mind as I was studying the most was the utter and deep implications of sin. When sin hit the garden, we see it show up in Genesis 3. And you have this experience where Adam and Eve act in sin, and then you see them hide, and then you see God kind of get into a conversation with them, and then begin to explain to them the implications of their sin. And in that process, I think he gives a picture of the unraveling. You're going to have a difficulty in life now because of this. Things are not going to work the way they're designed. And all the way from Genesis 3, I think that the seriousness of sin maybe isn't initially felt, but over humanity's growth in the ever increasingly sinful nature that we have, it just has built and built and built and built so that everything is unraveled. So I think what God is maybe looking at in the world is a fully reversed experience of what was just in its nugget, its very kernel state in the garden. He's looking, in a sense, through time. He's outside of it, but looking into time, saying, look at the extent of what this has done. What started out here and had these implications were dramatic. It's given birth, and it's now this full-blown brokenness.
Yeah.
And I think if you have something that is that broken, you have to figure a way to how you, at times you start over. I like the Etch-a-Sketches, back in the day, a little Etch-a-Sketch, and you start doing this, you're like, that isn't going to look right.
Yeah.
And you shake
You've
it.
got a frustrated 3-year-old.
Yeah, 3 years shaking around going, I got to make it work. But you shake it because you realize I can't redeem that. I can't fix that. And I think God is shaking up the world not that he can't, but he's actually redeemed some through that.
Yeah.
But there's just that, I think the devastation of sin is probably the thing that popped out most in my mind of why those images were like, those seem really like radical.
Yeah.
And so it helped me get to kind of look at my own heart to say, do I ever dismiss the value and the power of sin and say, oh, it's not that bad. The implications aren't that significant. It wasn't really done for the wrong motives. And it was a good thing for me. I think Zephaniah even used to pull back going, even if it was not insignificant to you, God in his wisdom and in his holiness, it is significant, and it has imploded everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so our sinful ignorance, right, to look at the moment in the garden with the tree and say, I mean, it
just a piece of fruit.
Just took a piece of fruit, right? Like how much harm could it do? And it's like our, unspiritual eyes don't see just the devastation that reeked out of that moment. And that just like true sense of havoc that it has. And I think the best way that I've been able to like get in touch with how sin has jacked the world up so much and me so much is it's actually really hard to think about heaven. If you spend enough time thinking about it and thinking about everything being right and like things working the way they should, relationships working the way they should, not having conflict or pain or tears, that just doesn't feel real. Like if you start thinking about that enough, it's like, how's that even possible? Because that's how deep sin has gotten into me and my worldview is I just can't even, it's like I breathe it. I can't imagine a life without it. There's the, nasty 9 or the terrible 10 or whatever that you avoid. But then there's those elements of just insecurity, selfishness, the way that I treat it. Like it's hard to imagine those just being gone. And when you start thinking about them being gone and just how impossible that feels, it's like, oh, that's what sin did.
Yeah, it's interesting when Zephaniah, and I didn't have a chance to get to this on the weekend, but as he was going through that statement, I hope I can find it here. In chapter 3, he kind of describes this new, I mentioned, I guess I didn't talk about it much, but he described the people, and I think it's a statement of like, how do we even understand devastation of sin? And he just summarizes, I think. He just says, I will purify the lips of the people that they can call in the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. And I think he's probably going, you guys can't understand the devastation, but the most dramatic way of showing that you really are serving God is your lips. And James 3 says, if a man can control his tongue, he can control anything. Yeah. And I think maybe Zephaniah is trying to just help us know, I know it's everything, guys, but here's the best way. I'm going to give you a new way. You're going to communicate in ways that are not going to be deceitful. You're not going to lie. He goes in that passage.
Jesus says the mouth speaks what the heart's full of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And somehow maybe that's the way in a Hebrew mind and in a Jewish mind that's the way they frame it. If you can control that, all the other sins are going to be evident because this is the place no one seems to control. Yeah. So maybe that's a way of Zephaniah is trying to solve your problem. Like, man, that's so devastating. I don't know. Where do I even start? Yeah. And maybe that was his way of describing everything's going to be amazing in heaven. Yeah.
Even down to the way you talk.
And maybe even starting with the way you talk. Yeah. Which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense why then there needs to be this great unraveling so that there can be new. And I mean, that is actually just rich throughout all of the New Testament ideas about Jesus's return. It actually, when you were reading through some of those kind of reversals in Zephaniah, it was making me think of Peter's comments about the, almost this idea of the earth being, put under fire so that all the dross and sin is removed. And and then he talks about then just new, just like the Etch-a-Sketch. Like, it's not like, we'll rebuild. It's like, no, drench it by fire and then new heaven, new earth, where there's this, beauty to the newness.
Well, and even in the middle of all the things, the creation, all of that, what's fascinating is in the middle of it right now, anyone who is in Christ, they are a new creation. We are the new creation that is going to meet with the other new creation, and we're experiencing now in our life walking with Jesus a small and oftentimes faint experience of
Some days it feels really small.
Very small. But an image, a picture of what this is going to be like.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty, I think, of when people give their life to Christ and they're like, man, my life is so different. Well, you are new.
Yeah.
And you're living in the old.
Yeah.
But you are the new. And I think that's why as believers, we should stick out in our world, because we're in a broken old world, but we're the new creation.
Yeah.
Living in an old creation.
We're that overlap, like that Venn diagram right now happening where heaven is meeting earth, or where there's that overlap between new and old. Yeah.
It's like the Costco samples. We're the Costco samples of what the world might taste.
Yeah.
And the world tastes us and they say, oh, I like that. I want that. And the gospel is waiting for them. And they get a flavor of the gospel through our lives. And yet, some will say, oh, I don't like that. And they'll walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. And such a good reminder for us of the way we should be living now. It's like, I don't want to, I think one of the best things that can happen for the devil is for Christians to say, well, it's a broken world, like, what can you do? And we just kind of give up while we live here and say, but the next one's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, no, I'm new and renewed right now. And I am a place where the presence of God is overlapping with a broken and fallen world. That flips the script. And I need to live with that level of confidence and passion. And I mean, when you start thinking about that, we don't talk about that very often. That's a really cool vision that God has for his people. He could have totally saved us, been so gracious, and he would still be worthy of all of our praise. And we just kind of camp out here and wait for the return of Christ, and then everything's going to be awesome. But him endowing us with his spirit and renewing us and recreating us actively and even progressively throughout our life as we become, a clearer and clearer representation of Christ. And then using us to advance his kingdom. I mean, it's
really cool. And the other side is he could have like just said it and just stay here, hang out. I'll come back, get you soon.
Yeah.
Which he said he's going to come back. The other thing he could have done is finish the Philippians 1:6. He who started the good work will bring it to completion. He could have said, Jackson, I'm going to save you. And boom, you're with me right now.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Yeah.
And there's something to that side. So he has us stay, not for like no reason. We're not just waiting, but also he didn't take us, which he's going to do at some point. There's this middle ground where we do become that light and salt, and we're changed and we're being changed. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a cool vision if we can tap into it. It's more than just waiting around. And, man, as you opened though, reading from the beginning of chapter 3 in Zephaniah, and I thought that is a scary read right there. And you positioned it really well this weekend, where it was, hey, if you want to stay far from God, or you want to get far from God, here's how to do it. Like it's not the intention of necessarily what Zephaniah is saying, but it's like, here's the guide. This is the guide if you wanted to get far from God. And then I'm thinking, but this is like God's covenant people. We live in a pagan nation that has no, covenantal promises with God, no history of God intervening on our behalf in these divine and miraculous ways. I mean, this is God's people. They have this all in their DNA, in the framework of their society, God's law in the framework of their society, and yet they have totally turned away from him. They don't want to listen to him. They spurn his correction. They refuse to rely on him. I mean, how foolish would we be living in a pagan nation that has no desire to live for God or, respect his ways, to think, well, that was dumb of them, but it could never be us. Like, it could very easily be us.
Absolutely.
And you would actually probably have to make a really concentrated effort to make sure that it's not you. So I'm thinking, like, they probably didn't just set out to get there, like nobody sets out to get there. It's the entropy of life. So how do you safeguard that? And it's beautiful picture of what it looks like to stay close to God. But I think actually tapping into that on a regular basis for people in their lives is a difficult practice.
Yeah, we were last night, Wendy and I were in our growth group, and we're talking through, because we're doing the sermon-based series in our small group. And so we're talking through this, and one of our team members, Ron, was mentioning just how the layers there in Zephaniah 3:2 of humility and trust and intimacy, which are kind of woven in there, are critical to every relationship we have in humanity. It's actually how effective companies run. If you have a humble leader, if you have trust in the company, and if you have some level of intimate relationship, it defines everything. And when those are lacking, things begin to break down. There is entropy. And so I think in the middle of that, it's interesting as how do you avoid doing that? I think one thing is just to constantly work at understanding that our walk with God is both belief, but it's relationship. And when you have a relationship with God, it helps define some of the other things. We're talking last night in our growth group, like of those three, which is the most important? We had a very fascinating conversation because you're like, oh no, humility. It's got to be humility, because if you're not humble, you're not going to listen. You're not going to get involved. And we said, well, no, it's trust. Because if you don't trust someone, you really won't be humble, and you really won't have intimacy. And no, actually it's intimacy. Because if you really love someone, then you're going to be humble, and then you're going to trust them. And it was just this, it's all of them. Simultaneously.
You can't separate them out.
You can't separate them. And so I think those kind of qualities, I think in life, is to see relationship with God as at the core. I think that pulls you toward intimacy. It pulls you toward that closeness. When you begin to look at what we have been given by God, then you also go, oh, now I have humility. Oh yeah, I don't deserve any of this. Look what he did for me. And then when you see the track record of God, then you go, I can trust him. So part of me, I think it's just that understanding the depth of God so that you understand ways to avoid going down that path. And I think that's what the people of Israel did, is they forgot the relationship with God. They didn't really remember his promises or camp on them. And then they really didn't have a humility. They were very arrogant.
I think what makes it so challenging to be those people who find ourselves continually opening ourselves up to God and remaining in proximity to him by trusting him and having this intimacy with him and a humility to our relationship is it's so tension filled. You have to reset that every day, it's like you, especially because he is unseen. There's, I think, another element that adds to the difficulty of building, particularly like trust and intimacy, when everything else that we have trust and intimacy with, we see with our eyes and touch with our hands. And, and so that's a challenge to like just naturally stack days with the Lord where it's like, oh, there's been trust and intimacy in our relationship. It's like every day I've got to, and eventually you pick up some momentum, but it's like every day there is this resetting of like, no, Lord, I trust you today, and I don't want to go through my day unaware of your presence and unaware of your love and joy that's set before me today. And that is a very tension-filled experience, which is why I think most of us find ourselves unknowingly further from the Lord than we'd anticipate ourselves to be. Because you can have these like habits and practices that are good habits and practices, but to have those be places where you are meeting with the presence of God and renewing that commitment to that relationship, that takes you waking up one day and saying, Lord, I'm really apathetic today. Like I can't see you. And it's honestly, I know it's so backwards because I am so undeserving to even be in this conversation with you, but I could care less about you right now. And I know that's so wrong. And I know the very best thing for me is to be in relationship with you. So help my apathy. Like, let's work through this. You're now sitting down and setting yourself up for a very long conversation with the Lord.
Absolutely.
There. And some days you just wake up. It's not like something happened. Some days you just wake up and you're like, Lord, what is it today? I just do not care. It's like those kinds of things. You've got to like really wrestle through those. That's a hard road. Yeah, and it's the power in the midst of that where I think we have this one-to-one with God. It's the power of community. It's the power of church. When I'm in whatever mode I'm in, if it's good or bad or ugly, I look at like the people of Israel. You think about them, they start with them. They had this legacy, years and years and years and years, hundreds of years of walking somehow with God. And they failed, I think, to really be aware of their community.
And I look at me and like when I'm going, let's say it's a bad day, I can look back to both my parents, to folks in my life who've gone before me, examples. I even read about examples, old people that I have books that are written now. They're no longer with us. And there's a legacy that reminds me to pull back. Then I look at my own children and how they teach me like Christ. Wow, I didn't see. That's really a good reminder. Just look at my kids' life.
Yeah.
And then we have, for those, that's just my family. A lot of people don't have Christian families. And so now you're going, well, what is my legacy? What's my community? That's where the church comes in, is like, okay, I don't have an example, but I see Pastor Jackson. I see him, and this is like so encouraging to me. They're watching you. And then perhaps their kids go to, into our kids' ministries on one of our campuses, and they come out and they go, here's what I learned, Mom. And their kids are teaching them. And it's this beautiful, I think, encouragement that happens as we do life together. Because when we're by ourselves, you're right, it's like, oh boy, I'm not sure where I'm at today.
Yeah.
And we've been there, we do that, and it's a struggle, but the faith community, the church specifically, but even broader, just the people that have been in the church in the past or just love Jesus around the world come along, and we begin to have this partnership.
Yeah, it is. It's not something we can do alone. And if you start trying to bring some level of, okay, I need to have some self-accountability here. I want to really keep a pulse. Like, I think, man, that's a great first step. If you're just kind of like clocking the punch card right now, start trying to keep a pulse on where is the level of my humility before the Lord, the openness with which I'm willing to let his word speak to me and be an authority in my life. Where is the level of my trust in him, that he's good and he has my best in mind and it's worthwhile to listen to him? And then where's my level of intimacy with him? Do I want him? Do I love him? Do I cherish my time with him? And if you start taking a pulse on that, that's going to wake you up pretty quick, because it's like, oh man, I've just been doing this and not thinking about it. Now that I'm trying to engage my heart in it, then you're going to start to realize it's pretty hard to kickstart my heart and like get my heart active in the process. And then that's going to leave you with like, I can't do this on my own. It's funny, so much of our faith operates like the day-to-day faith, not like maybe the faith over the course of our life, but the day-to-day, like living out my faith. So much of it operates, I'm a creative, so as you're talking about the people in our life, I'm thinking about inspiration. I see people who are at different stages in their faith than I am, either in more infantile stages or much further along. And it inspires me. I like look at their faith, right? And I mean, it really does go both ways, because if you're a new believer, like, let me just tell you this right now, don't stop talking, because old and embittered believers are so refreshed by what you have to say. It's like,
exactly
oh,
right.
I've forgotten my first
fresh.
love, Lord. This is beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, I love the way that that you love the Lord. And so there's new believers, man, they just infuse life to me. And like, man, Lord, where is my passion and appreciation gone for all the great things you've done in my life? So that like inspires me. And then, man, I hear a great message from somebody who the Lord's clearly worked in their life and in that message in them. And that inspires me. I'm like, man, Lord, it's not even necessarily always about the message. I just want to hear from your word the way they hear from your word. I want to cherish your word the way they cherish your word. And then I see, man, like modern day saints living among me who are just these older people who have never given up on the Lord, and they've become this really beautiful picture of Christ right in front of me. They have such a gentleness. They're not in a hurry. They're just so at peace. And I just think, oh Lord, I do not know that that's the person I'm becoming right now, but I really want to become that person. And it inspires me. And so it's like, you almost need those relationships, because it's those relationships that inspire you to give it your best today. Because otherwise, apart from the relationships, it's easy to stop giving your best over time. Just like self-discipline and just trying harder doesn't last.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love when you interact with people like that on the full spectrum of life. And then you watch, and like for me, like you, I watch people and we kind of learn and grow and see them. And when you walk into a life of someone and I like that. Yeah. Typically speaking, what you're liking is the fruit of the Spirit. Yeah. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. You're like, you can't put words really on it, but you want, that's just something right about that.
Yeah. There's a feeling about them.
And if you could pull back, you're probably seeing the fruit of the Spirit in evidence in ways that you really want.
Yeah.
And what's fun is, as you begin growing, other people see it in you, even when you can't see it in yourself.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those people that are at that point going, what are you talking about? I'm not that,
Yeah.
And they're so caught up with their own humility because they still know there's room to grow, and yet their life is a gift to those that watch them.
Yeah. And we just live this close to our lives. So it's like we have almost no perspective on ourselves.
Yep.
And so oftentimes, I think generally what I have found is when ever since my faith has really become my own, and it's been something that Jackson's chasing after, Jackson's been pretty hard on Jackson most of the time. It's like, I'm just never quite where I want to be. Like I feel like that's my faith continually. But then I'll have a conversation with somebody about, say something in me that they're like, that's really cool. I'm like, oh, that was like a huge emphasis of prayer for me for like 3 years.
Right.
I have totally forgotten that that's just like the air that I breathe now. That's something that's become new in me. And it's now become old to me because I'm totally unaware. It's natural. And so it's like, oh, that's awesome, Lord. Like you've moved in that way. So these areas that I'm not where I want to be right now, I can have a hope and a confidence. Maybe 10 years from now, somebody's going to be like, that's really cool. And it's like, oh, you would not believe
how far I've come.
Yeah, that was something the Lord and I, we were working on that for a while. And so there's just this really cool, like those relationships play such a role both in inspiring you, but I also do find those relationships help you figure out how far have you come. It's like as you have those conversations and people are like, wow, how do I become like that? Or how did you get there? It's like, well, I haven't thought about that in a while. That's a cool reminder.
And we also typically are inspired by our weaknesses. We see a strength. I'll see a strength in Jackson and go, wow, that is really cool. More than likely it's like, ooh, I really stink in that area.
And
so there's a side, so I think our awareness sometimes is more on what we don't have. And like you're saying, we'll miss maybe how God's using us in the areas we're stronger.
Yeah, that's good. So if you're not already, start taking a pulse when you're spending time with the Lord. Where are you at, especially in those 3 areas? And then once you're there, how can you get around some people who can inspire you? And they don't have to all be, ancient sages of, spirituality. They can be very new and fresh believers and a mix, of people across the spectrum. But how can you get around some people that can encourage you?
I love that.
Last, a question for you. I thought and I told you this already, I thought, man, the hidden treasure element of Zephaniah's name, but also the themes of him talking about the remnant post the exile to Babylon was just like a beautiful connection for me. Thinking through the remnant, obviously, throughout Old Testament prophecy, pretty common thing. It came up a lot, and I don't know that it's come up a ton in the minor prophets, but in the major prophets, it comes up a bunch. And so you have that term of this group of people that's going to be brought back to Israel, right? And this kind of hope that this isn't the final thing, what's happening. This isn't like God's bailing on all of his promises now. But referring to that as the hidden treasure of God, I thought, wow, that's just such a beautiful way to like, they're going to be in the midst of a pagan nation and nobody's going to know, but they're mine, and I'm going to bring them back. And I just thought that what a cool picture. And so I know that term refers predominantly to the nation of Israel and to this, group of people. But then I was thinking, man, how much does that like relate, that idea of being God's hidden treasure, to us today? Because I'm just thinking of this, in the world, but not of the world. And this like, man, we're right in the midst of the world. If a stranger were passing us by, they would functionally think that's just another person. But God looks on his people scattered throughout the world and says that those are my hidden treasures. So does that that was where my mind was going as you were talking about hidden treasure this weekend.
I love that, Jackson. I feel like from my own heart, in the church world we call the capital C church, meaning church around the world, not just HDC here locally, but the capital C churches, all the churches. And I would go to places that would maybe be very oppressive. And you go to a place where you're in a community where you are deeply attacked, maybe physically, or at least in a sense of just belittled and ridiculed.
Yeah.
And to think of reading that verse when you're in this country that is facing that, and you're like, no, there's something to hidden treasure there. I don't experience that.
Yeah.
And so I am so glad that this text we call the Bible applies to everyone that loves Jesus. It's for us, and in those situations, they're living in this difficult place, but they're God's treasure and their shelter. I love the idea that he's sheltering them, he's protecting, he's got a covering over them, and there's joy in that. I just love that from that extreme. And then I look at a country where we're at, which I would say it is still deeply hurtful to Christianity, but more from a moral just morass that we're in. It's just a declining society, and when you stand for Christ, you stand out, and they're going to ridicule you, and they'll call you names and have labels for you. And I think even in that, like, no, you're still a treasure. And I think the idea that I love the term that treasure is something that it's been put away. It's special. It's something unique. And I think in our world, none of us probably feel all that unique. We're like, I'm just another person.
Yeah.
But in God's mind, it's something where, no, I have this beautiful treasure. And, in 2 Timothy, we were reading recently, it talked about the idea that there are these vessels for honor that are set apart from some very special purposes. And I think that same kind of vessel of honor, hidden treasure, it's these things that God has pulled us out, and we're now a royal priesthood, a chosen people, a people for God's own possession, Peter tells us. And in that light, there's just value. And I love that, because in my personality, we're a little different here sometimes, but I kick myself a lot too.
Yeah.
Because I look at, well, man, there's the issues in my life that need to continue growing, and I'm not there. And it's a great reminder to me that, no, God sees great value in me.
Yeah.
And then for those who maybe overestimate their value, to say, oh no, God is the one who gives me my value. And it's not because I'm so great that I've earned something, but that God has granted me the value. And that's the beautiful thing, is that I'm not hidden treasure because of me. I'm hidden treasure because of him.
Yeah. 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 That's so good. And that's what's so, transformative about God's love for us, is it transforms you no matter where you're at on the spectrum. If you feel like you are of great importance, which I imagine there's some people there. I imagine there's fewer. I think most people would tend to think, I don't feel that significant. I don't feel that important. I don't feel that special. And because I would imagine that's why most of marketing leans that way, is like, hey, this thing will make you special, right? So probably the general group of people don't feel that special. And for either group to say, oh, I feel really important, to say, oh, my only importance is found in the way that the Lord loves me. And for the group that says, I don't feel important at all, I don't feel special, I don't feel like something to be cherished, to say, oh no, the Lord cherishes me, not even for who I will be or who I might be, but who I am today. He cherishes me, and his love is before me. And when you will allow the Lord to love you as you are, it transforms you into a person of love. That's the transformation process, is when you allow him to love you and say, I don't love you because of all that you've earned. I don't love you because of all the things you've accomplished. His love just strips back all of these things. It's like, I love you because you're mine.
Yeah.
You're made in my image. And it's so simple and such abounding and rich love that he has for us. And it's so offensive to all of our sensibilities about what makes us valuable and where we would find our worth. But when that process starts to take place in a person, it begins actually transforming them into a person who has the capability to love other people selflessly. And so if you want to look more like Jesus, if you want to love more like Jesus, you need to allow yourself to be loved by Jesus. I think we just want to get to the doing stuff for God. We just always keep wanting to get there. Let me go do some stuff for you. Because we just have this earning, I want to show you that I love you and that I, am worthy of this. And it's to do that, you have to first sit under and in his love and say, okay, this is so uncomfortable. I've not earned a moment of this.
Well, and I love what you're saying there, Jackson, because when you go through the book of 1 John, the entire book, there's a lot in there, but most of the book is about this idea of love, and he says, we love because he first loved us.
Yeah.
Which is describing exactly what you're saying. This is love. And he goes on and describes all the aspects of love. And they're basically describing our hidden treasure before God is ultimately rooted in him loving us first, him choosing us first, him calling us to himself.
Yeah.
And when we have that as a foundation, then we truly do, as of course John goes through the whole book again, you need to love each other.
Yeah.
This is a sign that we actually are disciples. Jesus says you have love one for another. There's the beauty of loving treasure.
Yeah. 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 That's cool. Being able to see that in other people as well. Yeah. And I think, it's such an interesting thing as we're talking about it, because I didn't have this intention or structure to the questions, but it's almost like getting the order right? Like you need to allow God to love you first. That's and that's all kinds of uncomfortable, because every other relationship you've ever been in, you have earned or deserved love by your behavior.
Way more transactional.
Yeah, way more transactional. You have no claim on a reason why he should love you outside of the fact that you're his and made in his image. Things that are transcendent about you, nothing that you've done. And so you sit in that. And then that transforms you into a person who has then the ability to love other people in the same way, not seeing them for what they can do for you or what they've accomplished for you, and not operating through a transactional love with others, but seeing them also as transcendently made in the image of God, valuable, treasured, and adored by him. But if you just try to say, oh, I'm going to go love people, you're missing the source, like you haven't tapped into the source first. Yeah. And so you end up with a love that's filled with a lot of like self-effort and a lot of like, I'm here, I'm loving you because I'm trying to earn God's love, first of all. And then second of all, I'm loving you out of my own strength and as best I can muster. And so it's not really very pure in that sense either. And so you end up with this kind of really, jacked up attempt at loving people. And then you might think, well, maybe none of this works, And it's like, oh, you've missed the source.
Well, and it's funny because there are times, and I totally agree with what you're saying, there are times when we choose, love is by nature a choice. It's not an emotion, it's a choice. And so when we have a situation, you have a moment, you have to choose to love someone who actually might be unlovable to you, that choice is still rooted in the love that was given to us by God.
Yeah.
It's not our value. We're not like, oh, I'm so I was great today. I chose to love. Well, no, you chose to live in the love of God, which causes you to love others.
Yeah.
The choice is not to be, oh, I'm going to earn something.
Yeah.
The choice is I'm going to live in the love of Jesus, who then when that goes through my life, I'm going to actually act on that.
Yeah.
Again, it's the order thing you were mentioning.
Yeah.
Because I think that's so valuable, because there's times that love feels more natural to do things like, oh, I love this moment and I'm going to be in this, but it's so great. What a great moment. And then you say, I'm going to choose love in this moment, even though it's hard.
Yeah.
But both of those are reflective of the relationship with God, who gives us the ability to love in any circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so often, now you go all the way back to the beginning, man, if we are just punching the clock with God, you are missing out on an opportunity in that moment when you're praying or reading scripture or engaging in a different spiritual discipline. You are missing out on an opportunity daily to tap into being loved by God so that you can be a person of love to other people. And when that time transforms from checking boxes to earn God's love, right?
Yeah.
Why are you checking a box? You're trying to earn something.
Right.
And so when that time transforms from checking boxes to, okay, I'm here to be loved by God. And that's so uncomfortable. That then becomes a place of such delight. And you're not going to have to force yourself to get there. You're going to want to get there.
And the beauty of this, I just think, as you're talking, my mind's taking this, Jackson. I'm going back to what I said earlier. The same reality of that love that we were just describing goes to the joy from the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah.
When we live in the joy of our God, we then can express the joy to the world. The same thing with the peace of God.
Yeah.
We have this peace that comes from Christ. Then we now live out the peace, which then we can give it to others. I think, like you're saying, sometimes we fail in all of those fruit because we're bypassing the source of them and trying to artificially create them because we know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I need to be peaceful.
I'm supposed to be this way.
I should be peaceful. I need to be peaceful. And I'm going to be peaceful. And we fight it. And you're like, why am I not peaceful? Well, I don't think you're getting this peace that's ruling your heart so that you can then live in peace in this world.
Yeah.
And patience. Why am I not more patient? There's another one in that passage.
Yeah.
Well, I need to live in the patience of Christ. How patient was he with me? Oh, yeah, okay, pretty patient.
Yeah.
Okay, if I live in that patience, what does it mean? Okay, then I can then choose to be patient toward others. And so I love it. It's so fully orbed.
Yeah, yeah. When you use that, see that space as an opportunity to tap into the presence and person of God to transform you to look more like him, that becomes a much more valuable space. And I think just in our very transactional world that we live in, our very busy schedules, we've turned spiritual rhythms, and particularly like a devotional time in the day, we've turned that into a time card with God where we just, you exist, and it's like, that's the day. And it's like, man, we are missing out on so much, which is then creating a white knuckled faith that's like, I'm trying. I just don't know if any of this is real. And it's like, well, of course none of it feels real because you've not once tapped into the power that makes it real. When you tap into that the same power that raised Christ from the dead is living in you, that has the power to transform you to look like Christ. That has the ability to do that. But you do not have the ability to do that. Yeah, that's why Christ died for you. Yeah,
and that's that organicness of our faith, that we are rooted in Christ. Those for Colossians 2 talks about, we're rooted in Christ. There's this whole system that is rooted into what he is. Those are in my view, simplistically, the fruit of the Spirit, a great example.
Yeah.
We have roots into those things because of Christ. Well, what happens when your roots are into that, then you begin to grow, and then all of a sudden the fruit of your life begins to come out of what you're rooted in.
Yeah.
So why are peaceful people peaceful on the outside? Is there peaceful people underground rooted in that?
Yeah.
And we just see the outside, and you're like, it's like when we talk about, when you see someone, you're like, oh, that's so attractive. That's so, you are inspiring.
Yeah.
You're inspired because you see something on the outside that's beautiful. We really don't notice the underside of that.
Yeah.
But that's really what's feeding the beauty that we see in the flowers of someone's life. You're like, oh, that's just beautiful. I love what's going on there.
Yeah.
There's so much more that has to trigger that to take place.
Yeah, and formed over a long period of time. So don't get some wacky expectations here. Like tomorrow I'm going to look more like Jesus.
I'm going to be killing it. It's great.
Yeah, but this is, man, you start here and you will watch the trajectory of your life change.
Absolutely.
And the trajectory of the person you're becoming change. And that is, I think if you can stick with it long enough to get a hint of, wow, that's a needle moving in me, that's something shifting in me, I didn't think possible, felt like a mountain to who Jackson was. And I just see it I don't need to see it even gone yet. I just see it move a little bit, and I'm thinking, this is real. Like this is actually possible for me to become the person that Scripture tells me I can become. Yeah. It's a real thing.
Well, and it takes that reality that we get so pumped at and joyful, and our lives are changing. And you read those, sounds like theological words in the Bible, but how do I bring glory to God? We glorify God because he's the one who makes that change possible.
Yeah.
So when we become who he envisions us to be, and then he actually not envisions us, he actually created us to be. And it's just created us to be, but he's empowered us to be.
Yeah.
And then he's given us the example to be that. When we begin to do that, our lives become something that God receives glory from. And that's, again, back full circle why humility is so important.
Yeah.
They're all back to God provided it.
And then beautiful segue into how then evangelism becomes so natural. Somebody says, how are you this? Well, you would have to be so foolish in that moment to say, well, I've really been trying for a long time.
I've been killing it.
Yeah. It's like, no, clearly I have been daily seeking to tap into the power and presence of God so that I can become more like him. Yeah. And he has not only saved me, but he's transformed me, and I owe my whole life to him, and he gets all the glory and the credit. And that is like the most organic form of evangelism.
Yeah.
And it's so, I mean, you just look at the order, the sequence of events that can happen when we begin tapping into the power and presence of God. And the writings on the wall throughout all the minor prophets of if you don't.
Yeah.
If you try to, these are well-intentioned people of God who tried in their own strength and failed. They also did not have the power and presence of the Holy Spirit. Right. And so we can't be too hard on them here. We would be doomed. But, they are well-intentioned people. You can't just say, oh, well, they're supervillains or I would never. These are well-intentioned people who strayed very far from God. And you will find yourself in the exact same spot if we do not become a people who regularly meet with him, draw close to him, open ourselves up to him, and allow him and his presence to change our lives.
Yeah, I love that, Jackson.
That's cool. Well, thank you for taking the time. This has been a fun conversation.
Yeah,
I'm getting inspired right now.
Awesome.
I'm all revved up.
Me too.
Yeah. And I hope it's been a good conversation for you guys. As always, if you've got something that you're taking away from Pastor Kurt's message this weekend, we'd love to know there in the comments. Would you please let us know that? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so that you get future videos as well. But that's all we have for this week. We'll catch you guys next week on Tangible Takeaways.
Take care.